Hi. This story is Robin Hood of Sherwood Forest by Ann McGovern. Chapter 6. How the Sheriff Tries to Get Revenge. All the way home from Sherwood Forest, and the next day, and the day after that, the sheriff thought of nothing but how to take revenge on Robin Hood. The more he thought, the angrier he became, until he could neither eat nor sleep. One cool September night, he lay abed for many hours without closing his eyes. At last, he decided on a scheme to trap Robin Hood within the gates of Nottingham town, and then to hang him. By the time the sun paled the sky, the sheriff had worked out his plan in every detail. Early in the morning, 60 of the sheriff's horsemen rode far and wide into the countryside, proclaiming a shooting contest that was to take place in a fortnight. Every man who could hold a bow was bidden to shoot for the prize of a silver arrow, tipped with a head of purest gold. In a short time, tidings of this match came to the greenwood. Then Robin Hood called his merry men about him. "The sheriff's proclamation has a smell about it as bad as a barrel of stale ale," he said. "If he thinks to make us fools, dead fools at that, the more fool he. But hearken to this cunning." Whereupon Robin spoke his plan. The best archers of the band would go thither to Nottingham town, with Robin himself among them, to shoot for the prize. Each would change the color of his hair and beard with dyes made from berries and bark in the woods. Each would dress in a mantle of colored cloth, some in rags like beggars, to hide the cloth of Lincoln green beneath. 20 other bold men would make their way among the crowds, their best bows and arrows hidden beneath their cloaks, lest there be trouble. When the day of the match dawned bright and clear, a strange band of men made their way along the high road to Nottingham town. Some were dressed in rags and shreds like beggars. Others wore bright-colored cloaks. But the strangest by far was the man who led them. All in scarlet was he, and not even his limping walk, nor the black patch that covered his right eye, could hide his bold, handsome air. The fair grounds of Nottingham town had never looked gayer. From the striped tents and peddlers' stalls, many colored ribbons fluttered in the mild autumn breeze. The sounds that filled the air were holiday sounds, minstrels singing of heroes and heartbreak, rosy-cheeked lasses laughing as they danced to the music of fiddle and fife, peddlers shouting their wares, silver bells tinkling on carts and horses. But if one cared to listen well, one name could be heard over and over, the name of Robin Hood. For most of the people in this part of the country had heard of the many ways in which Robin had tricked the sheriff, and they knew the true reason for the shooting match. In their heart of hearts, the good poor folk hoped Robin Hood would stay safely away this day, but the rich and powerful longed for his capture. And in truth, the sheriff and his men-at-arms feared that Robin Hood had stayed away. No man in Lincoln Green could be seen in the crowd, or, for that matter, anyone who came near to fitting Robin Hood's description. Now the crowd spilled over onto the green, where the match was soon to take place. The sheriff and his lady sat in the center of the stands reserved for squires, abbots, rich knights, and their ladies. The poor folk stayed behind a wooden rail built to keep them away from the targets. All was still for a moment as the heralds raised their trumpets to their lips to announce that the match was beginning and to give the rules. Then heads turned and eyes peered as the archers took their places, 800 in all. Plucking at his beard nervously, the sheriff studied each archer who made his try with the arrow. Many beggars and fools are here today, he thought, but, by my faith, none that wears the face of Robin Hood. At first, each man was allowed to shoot only one arrow. Those who came closest to the mark could shoot again, and this was repeated over and over until the contest narrowed down to 10 men. If Robin Hood is here, thought the sheriff, he will be shooting now, for only the noblest arms are left. And he signaled to his guardsmen to be wary and watchful of those they did not know. Of the 10, the sheriff recognized the sheriff and most of the company present recognized 6, famous throughout the land for their bold shooting. The sheriff said to himself, "Of the 4 strangers, none has a beard like Robin's, yellow as the sun, and only the crippled beggar stands as tall as that villainous outlaw. Wait, something about him. But no, how can I seize a one-eyed cripple and claim he is Robin Hood? If I were to be wrong, the people would laugh me out of this country." So went the sheriff's thoughts as, one by one, the remaining men shot at the mark. So wondrous was their skill that not a word was spoken in all the watching throng. Now the contest was between 2 men. The one-eyed and crippled beggar dressed all in red, and a tall fellow wearing a blue cloak. There were pleased murmurs among the archers who had shot earlier, but had failed to top the skill of the 2 men on the green. And no wonder, for these 2 who now raised their bows were none other than Will Stutely and Robin Hood. First, it was Robin's turn. He limped to the line and almost carelessly sped the shaft. Fair flew his arrow and lit a hair's breadth from the target's center. "A scarlet! A scarlet!" cheered the crowd for the tattered stranger in red. Next to shoot was Will. With a flourish, he raised his arm high to draw back his bow. But in doing so, his cloak parted to reveal the Lincoln green color of the outlaw band. At this, the sheriff, getting to his feet, shouted to his guardsmen, "Seize him! Seize the villain! Death to any of Robin Hood's men!" Then 40 of Robin's men looked to their red-clad leader to spring into action. But Robin would not move a muscle, even when 12 men-at-arms dragged Will Stutely from the green. The sheriff's heralds blew upon their trumpets to quiet the uproarious crowd, and from the one-eyed crippled beggar in red came these words, clearly heard: "Am I not to get the chance to draw my yew bow once again? Or is this shooting contest merely a trap to catch a wretched outlaw?" At this, the sheriff roared with laughter, for he was in good humor now that one of Robin Hood's men was firmly bound, although he would have liked it much better had the ties been drawn over the chest of Robin Hood himself. "Good beggar," the sheriff cried, "whoever thou art, if thou shootest shrewder than the outlaw, I will add the prize of 50 gold coins to the silver arrow." Once more, Robin made ready, then loosed the string. A moment later, a gray goose feather quivered and held in the very center of the target. A hush came over the crowd, followed by a great roar, for truly no one had ever seen such shooting before. The sheriff, still beside himself with delight, shouted so all could hear, "By my faith, thou hast shot fairer than that coward Robin Hood, who dared not show his face here today, but sent instead a lesser man." At this, Robin's lips tightened and his eyes narrowed, but he made no outward sign that the words of the sheriff had touched him. The sheriff went on, "Cast off thy tatters, poor friend. I will clothe thee in velvets, if thou wilt enter my service as my chief archer." "Sir," replied Robin gravely, "thy offer does please me greatly, but far greater would my pleasure this day be if I myself could hang the knave who has dishonored thy match by shooting with an outlaw bow." "Thou art a loyal man as well as a princely archer," said the sheriff. "Thou shalt have this pleasure. Let us go to the gallows with this varlet straightway." Then Will Stutely was tumbled roughly into a wooden cart, and the procession started across the green to the gallows, which loomed darkly over the town. And still the 40 men who were scattered throughout the crowd watched Robin Hood closely, all the while keeping a hard grip on their bows beneath their cloaks. Although Will had full trust in his master, he nevertheless grew pale as they reached the place of death. But bravely he spoke to the sheriff in clear, untrembling words. "My lord, I will take my death as my master Robin Hood taught me." But ere I die, grant me one boon. Place a sword in my hand, and I will fight all your men, though there be 100, until the last drop of blood has left my body." The crowd cheered his valiant words, but the sheriff cried out in anger, "No, thou shalt die by hanging, like the dog thou art. And if my luck holds, then Robin Hood shall swing soon after." Robin Hood, never far from his greenwood friend, bent his head slightly and murmured, "Never fear, Goodwill, you shall be free. Methinks this noose would be better fitted to the sheriff's fat neck." Straightening quickly, Robin cast off the patch from his right eye and thrust out the sword beneath his beggar's clothes. Then he cut Will's bonds, shouting, "Now, my merry men, now let thine arrows fly." At this, 40 bows came out from 40 cloaks, and 40 arrows pointed at the sheriff's heart. Of a sudden, the sheriff leapt from his horse and hid himself in the crowd. In a moment, all was madness. Arrows fell thick and fast from every side, and the sheriff's men scattered in every direction. When Robin Hood saw that the way was open to the greenwood, he gave the signal. With arrows still flying, the band fell back together, and none of the sheriff's men dared penetrate the wall of arrows they made. And so the outlaws made their way to the shelter of Sherwood Forest. It was a triumphant band that assembled under the wide oak that evening. Though some still bled from wounds taken in the fray, they were full of joy as they looked up at the silver arrow with the golden head that hung from a leafy bough. And no heart was so filled with gladness as Will Stutely's. More than once that day, he had thought he would never again hear the sweet songs of the birds flying free in his beloved Sherwood home. The end.